Before we begin, we would like to remind participants that you may listen to this session in Spanish by clicking on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. Thank you.
Greetings, participants. We are now ready to begin our inaugural Immune Impact Global Summit, uniting the world through the SDGs. We're incredibly excited to have you with us from virtually every corner of the globe. I'm Shukriya Malgzara, joining you from Istanbul, Turkey, and I'm honored to be a member of this year's executive team.
And my name is Ananya Prasad, and I'm joining you today from Doha, Qatar.
Hello, my name is Hugh McDowell, and I'm speaking to you from Belfast, the United Kingdom.
My name is Abdullah Shamsi, and it is my pleasure to be joining you today from Cairo, Egypt.
Hi, my name is Katie Chu, and I'm joining you today from Taipei.
And last but not least, my name is Maria Fernandez from Bilbao, Spain, rounding out the executive team for this year's Global Summit. At a traditional conference, this is normally the point where we would show you exit doors in case of emergency, or what to do if you needed to see a nurse or visit the lost and found. But the world is a very different place at the moment, and so too are the traditional rules of a conference.
After technical difficulties, have a question about your schedule or a general question about Immune Impact, please visit our 24/7 help room. A link to that will be dropped in the chat and will be accessible throughout the event. And last but not least, we want you to make friends, create new networks of change makers, and take ideas and knowledge back to your schools and MUN programs, so you can be part of the global solution to address the critical issues we face today.
On a purely practical note, we would like to remind participants that they can configure the shape of their viewing screen here in Zoom by going to the upper right-hand corner and clicking on Speaker of Gallery View. You may choose the view option that works best on your device. I would now like to introduce my fellow executive team member, Ananya, who will be presenting a welcome speech.
Honored participants, esteemed guests, welcome to the first day of our inaugural Global Summit, with presenters and participants joining from all corners of the world, coming from close to 100 different countries. Despite our differences, we are not infatuated. Despite our diversity, we are not infatuated by our differences, but rather embrace a singular goal, a better future. These three words mean different things to each of us, but can be summarized by 17 goals. The Sustainable Development Goals, which unify the 193 member states of the UN. The 17 different SDGs ranging from eradicating poverty to preserving life below water find a way to permeate our everyday lives as global citizens. We, as global citizens, not only have the responsibility to be aware of the SDGs, but also be actively involved in them, regionally within our communities or through social media. Social media has helped mobilize an entire generation and has been key in raising awareness for issues that we have the privilege of not experiencing and issues that impact us all, enabling a sense of interconnectedness that we have never seen before. It is also a huge factor as to why the Global Summit exists. We at MUN Impact refuse to sit idle when the world has seemingly come to a standstill. We will continue to engage in conversations, collaborate, and initiate action by planning today for a brighter tomorrow. We can do better, and we will. All the workshops today created by passionate students and adults shed light on a variety of SDGs to raise awareness, start a conversation, and so much more. It is much easier to be disheartened when faced with the grim situations across the world, but today's presenters and keynote speaker prove that there is an alternative: hope. We may not be able to solve all of the world's issues, but that is certainly not enough reason to not try. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Martin. It is now my honor to welcome Mr. Will Kennedy, the Senior Program Officer of the United Nations Office for Partnerships at UN headquarters in New York. Mr. Kennedy joined the Office for Partnerships in 1998, where he is responsible for oversight of a large portfolio of global development projects being implemented by the United Nations with funding support from the UN Foundation. He also provides regular advice and counsel to corporate foundation and NGO executives on strategic opportunities for collaborating with the United Nations. He brings considerable experience in international development, including project planning, development, and management, having worked with several non-governmental organizations and UN agencies. We're humbled to have Mr. Kennedy here today to make a few opening remarks. Mr. Kennedy, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's a real honor and privilege for me to be a part of this Model UN Impact Global Summit and to be able to speak to so many extraordinary young people representing so many countries around the world. As a representative of the United Nations Office for Partnerships at UN headquarters in New York, I want to extend my special thanks and appreciation to the leadership of MUN Impact for their commitment to building a global community of young people that share a common belief in the power of the Model United Nations to inform, to inspire, and to motivate action in support of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I applaud all of you who are online today for your leadership, for your commitment, for your engagement in doing your part to contribute towards the advancement of the SDGs and a more peaceful, a more sustainable, a more inclusive, and a more prosperous world. I want you to know that the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, regards youth as the greatest source of hope for the future of humanity and the planet. And I quote, "From climate change to gender equality, to social justice and human rights, it is your generation that is on the front lines and in the headlines. I, the Secretary General, am inspired by your passion and your determination, and I am with you. In fact, the entire United Nations stands with you and indeed belongs to you." This is no longer the Secretary General speaking, this is just me. Your generation, which I guess is Gen Z, is the best educated, the most enlightened, the most connected of any generation in history. You have the power to shape social norms and culture, to influence public policy priorities, and to transform markets. The United Nations needs each of you to reimagine what a sustainable and inclusive society and economy actually looks like, and to pursue that vision with the passion and commitment it requires as engaged global citizens, as students, as innovators, and as change makers. We also need you as champions of multilateralism, as beacons for human rights, and as promoters of peaceful coexistence. In closing, I'd like to share a quote from the late Robert F. Kennedy to students in Cape Town, South Africa in 1966, long before you were born, that underscores the power and influence of youth as well as any statement I've come across. And he said, "The world demands the qualities of youth, not a time of life, but a state of mind, a temper of the will, a quality of the imagination, a predominance of courage over timidity, of the appetite for adventure over the love of ease." On that eloquent note, I wish you all an inspiring and successful summit, and I'm honored and thank you for the opportunity to share those remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. It means a great deal to our participants to have you share your words of encouragement with us. MUN Impact is committed to working in partnership with the United Nations and looks forward to a fruitful collaboration in the future. We would now like to share the opening ceremony video produced by our incredible global press team, a truly collaborative effort worked on by students from around the world and made exclusively for your viewing pleasure. Enjoy.
MUN Impact's goal has always been to connect leaders and globally minded students to real-life problems and solutions. This Global Summit will do exactly that. This summit will highlight students, creative thinkers, problem solvers, diplomats, and world leaders. And our hope is that the participants will use these 3 days as the building blocks for their own ideas, projects, and more, to help continue to raise awareness for the SDGs and make positive change in their own communities.
While physically disconnected due to the pandemic, technology can bring us together, and Summit will do so by bringing more than 1,600 students and participants from 96 countries.
Making an impact is much easier said than done, but the Global Summit provides the tools necessary to accomplish this goal. Workshops created by passionate students and adults not only help start a conversation, but inspire people to remain engaged and connected with the world around us.
The amazing factor of this global summit is that we have speakers such as Sam Altman and Dr. Charles McNeil, who are sure to inspire loads of students around the globe.
The Global Summit is awesome and exciting because it feels good when we are able to connect throughout the world and learn from each other sitting at our homes.
I encourage you to be curious, ask questions and take notes, and engage fully with both the presenters and your peers. Get ready to jump in, and I can't wait to see you there.
3 days, dozens of workshops, 1,600 of you from 95 countries worldwide. Students, teachers, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the MUN Impact Global Summit 2020.
A huge thank you to our amazing social media and press team, with particular thanks to our Summit press heads, Ali Williams and Mohammed Mustafa. Thank you for your incredible work.
It is now my great honor to introduce today's keynote speaker, Michelle Konings. Mrs. Konings was appointed Assistant Secretary General and Executive Director of the Counterterrorism Committee Executive Directorate by United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres in August 2017. Before working at the United Nations, Mrs. Konings was President of Eurojust, the European Union agency tasked with dealing with judicial cooperation in criminal matters. Prior to joining Eurojust, Mrs. Konings was a federal prosecutor in Belgium dealing with terrorism and organized crime. Before Mrs. Konings takes the floor, we would like to tell our participants that the question function is now open. And if you have a question for our speaker, please feel free to type those into the questions function. Our MUN at Home Secretary General Jaideep Singh will be monitoring the questions and will facilitate the question and answer session at the conclusion of Mrs. Konings' speech. Mrs. Konings, welcome. You now have the floor.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, whomever you are and wherever you are. Buenos dias a todos. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today. And I hope sincerely that you all are in good health, in good shape, and in good spirit, because simply health is wealth. And in a world of social distance, we need definitely more partnership closeness. And let's all be honest, this world has been put in slow motion, but there is no reason whatsoever to slow down our activities. And dealing with terrorism since many, many years, and now for the United Nations at the level of the Security Council, I can tell you that terrorism is one of those uncertainties. When recently the 75th anniversary of the United Nations was commemorated, we saw that on the basis of questioning of the whole population in the world, terrorism was in fact in the top 10 as a 10th uncertainty of all the uncertainties. And of the uncertainties, we saw that in the top 3 were climate, environment, armed conflicts and violence, health risk, new tech. And then only followed on the 10th place with terrorism and organized crime. Today, I'm really pleased to enlighten you on the role of the United Nations in fighting that uncertainty called terrorism. And I will do this in 4 different layers. What is terrorism threat right now? Is there a terrorism threat? And what is the United Nations doing to mitigate that threat? And also, what do we see amidst the COVID-19? Has that an impact on terrorism, countering terrorism? And finally, as we are all driven by the 17 SDGs, put that in the context of 4 particular SDGs, 4, 5, 16, and 17. But more to come later on. Let's start with the threat, the terrorism threat. When we overfly the world, we see that terrorism is still a global and very severe threat. And we can say that we have as main terrorist groups in the world still ISIL and Daesh operating in different parts of the world, but having devastating terrorist activity, especially in Africa, be it in the Sahel, West Africa, East Africa, South Africa, and a lot of other places in the world. So yes, Daesh, ISIL is a possibility that can cause severe damage through inspired terrorist attacks. Still nowadays, in spite of the fact that they lost that territory a few months ago, and in spite of the change of the leadership. Then you have Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda is still active in different parts of the world, especially again in the Islamic Maghreb, in different parts of Africa. Again, Al-Qaeda is, for instance, active in the shape of Al-Shabaab in Eastern Africa, as we all know. That is one part of the reality, and we know that those terrorist organizations do create partnerships and friendships and solidarity with armed groups and criminal groups, and that in the middle of all this, we also are confronted with community friction. If we move further on, we all know that a few years ago, the whole world was being confronted with what we called foreign terrorist fighters. Young men, women, children going to the conflict zones in Iraq, in Syria, and being involved in terrorist activity. Since 2017-18, we saw that a lot of those foreign terrorist fighters all were killed or were up to the point to return or relocate to other places. And we are still confronted with a part of those women and children linked to those foreign terrorist fighters and terrorist groups who have been active or not active, but who are detained right now in camps in Syria and Iraq, and they pose a big humanitarian problem. What the Secretary General has said textually, we have to do something with those women and children. We have to take care of those women and children. Leaving them there in despair, and especially now on the COVID-19, is not an option, because hence, we will create a whole generation, a future generation of people without hope, without perspective, and easy targets for terrorists. So we urge, and especially Secretary General urge all the member states, all the 193 member states, to take care of their citizens. We also have seen that some of those foreign terrorist fighters that return home have been taken to justice. Some of them are taken in prison, and also in prison we have to take care of them and verify if there is a chance of rehabilitating them, and after their imprisonment to reintegrate them in society, to give them again hope and perspective, to be part of a resilient society. And also, we have been confronted with people who left the prison after very short imprisonments and who also have to be taken care of so that they remain on the right path and are not targeted by terrorists or violent extremists. And although this kind of terrorism is not good enough, we have been and gradually and more confronted with what we call in our jargon extreme right-wing terrorism. And we see that amidst especially COVID-19, a lot of miscontent people are using misinformation, disinformation, malinformation to cause division, to cause hatred. Hatred can be reconverted in violence, and violence can lead to different forms of violent extremism and finally to terrorist attacks. I'm not inventing anything. If you just go back to last year, you see that there were also terrorist attacks linked to those extreme right-wing persons. Look at New Zealand, March, the Christchurch attack against mosque. Look at what happened in the United States, in El Paso, in a Walmart, against a minority of Hispanic persons in August last year. And at the end of last year in Germany, in Halle, there was another attack against a synagogue. And not so long ago, this year in February, another person attacked two shisha bars in Hanau. So you see, it is translated into hard terrorist activity, and that is what is really worrying us, that your thoughts, your ideology, or your racist or white supremacist thought lead you to terrorist activity. And we are concerned because of the frequency, we're concerned of the lethality, and we're also concerned about the international character of that threat. And if we also look at the threats, one of the favorite targets of terrorism has been and will be soft target. All of us going to theaters, going to football stadium, going to airports, going to different places where you should be very, very safe and secure, where they use very simple things like knives, like lorries, like vehicles. That is exactly what we call the weaponization of things. So it is extremely important that we protect those soft targets and that we do this with all means available, that we take preventive measures, that we are striving for preparedness, that we, during an attack, ensure that there is a mitigation of the risk, and that especially after those hopeful attacks, there is a possibility to have a recovery and to create resilient societies, resilient cities again. So soft target is one of our concerns. But now that we're all hyper connected, which is wonderful because we can continue our business, we also have to take care of cyber threats. Cyber threats where we see that especially terrorist organizations are using online facilities to have propaganda, to glorify terrorism, to use their terrorist narratives to incite, to recruit, and even to fundraise. So we really need to pay attention. And in a world of ever developing new techniques like drones, like artificial intelligence, with e-games all over the place, we really have to be vigilant, alert at all times. If all those new techniques are used for the good purposes, we are all safe and secure. But that is exactly the problem, because we have concerns that terrorists and violent extremists will what we call weaponize social media, internet, AI, and drones, and eventually also e-games. So please be part of that vigilance and alertness. And finally, we also see that bioterrorism, inspired by what the virus is now causing worldwide, what could the terrorists do with a bioterrorist attack? Question mark. So yes, there is no reason to slow down, and that's the reason why we have been working relentlessly at the United Nations with all possible partners. But let's now just look at CTAT, Counterterrorism Committee Executive Directorate, which I'm leading since November 2017. Part of the Security Council and having a threefold task. We are the assessors of counterterrorism and violent extremism in the world at the United Nations. And that means that we constantly have our radar on in the 193 countries and look from our desks or through visits we have on the spot, physical visits in the countries, what kind of CT measures, counterterrorism measures have been taken. And that goes from legislation to strong institutions, to a whole of society, to a whole of government approach. And what is a whole of society approach? Well, we all are part of the solution, and the religious leaders, and the NGOs, and the civil society organizations, and the women, and the men, and the children, and all this has to be tackled with a human rights compliant way. If security, counterterrorism measures are taken without respect of human rights, in a non-gender kind way, are not taking count of the age, we have at all levels a problem. So legislation, border control, counter narrative, look at what is being said online, offline, all this is part of what we assess in our dialogues with the member states. And this is not meant to inspect or to name and shame at the end of our assessment. It's really meant to see what are the gaps, what are the loopholes in the member states' activities. And finally, in making the bridge between that member state and other member states or other members of the United Nations in solving those gaps, in not only identifying those problems, but also bringing solutions by helping them in having a better legislation, by helping them in strengthening the border controls, by helping them in building up counterterrorism strategies where all players can play a role, where all portfolio holders, all ministries can work together. It's not only the work of justice and interior and defense, but also of youth and women and education and sport, all together can play a role. And that's exactly what we strive for in all the member states, in all the regions and across the regions. So when we come back, we do not only make a report for the Security Council in order to find solutions, but we very often also coming back with good practices. And those good practices can be exported to other countries, to the rest of the world, and can be a source of inspiration. That is one task, assessment. But assessment must lead to, as I said, to solutions. And hence, we will, with our partners, with member states, with UN partners like the Office of Counterterrorism, like UNODC, work on finding solutions. And that is called technical assistance and capacity building. So based on our assessments, on our constant dialogue, we will identify what are the priority problems, where are those priority problems to be tackled, and what can we do as a matter of urgency. And that can go in technical aid, as I said, in the building up of legislation, but also by ensuring that the movement of travelers, and especially terrorist travelers, are being identified and tackled in the most technical way through the installation or the launching of what we call passenger names record and advanced passengers information. So you see, there is a lot of technical stuff going on, but after having had this dialogue, after having identified the problems, we make a bridge with all those who can offer solutions. And finally, there is also the technical expertise which we put at the disposal of all the 193 member states, where we can only say one word, and that's partnership. If we see that terrorists are making massive use, I think it is extremely important that we stop that use of ICT for terrorist purposes by making a huge partnership with the tech industry, with the private industry. And if we see that terrorists or violent extremists are really abusing online to have propaganda, recruiting and fundraising to strive for a moderation, an alternative narrative, or at least to make sure that that very insightful content is being taken off. And that's something we cannot do alone by ourselves. That is something that asks for a close partnership between the law enforcement authorities, the intelligence authorities, and the private sector. And that goes also when we want to fight financing of terrorism. Again, we need to step up the partnerships between police, law enforcement, justice, the private sector, at bank industry and the tech industry. And on and on and on. If we want to be part of the solution, we have to strive for partnership. And that's exactly the expertise we bring in to the countries. If you want to have a good counter-narrative, please include women in that activity, include youth in that activity, include schools, include religious leaders, NGOs in that activity, and don't make it an exclusive responsibility of the government as such. It is the two together with partnerships with the private sector, so to say. And finally, what we also do as part of our daily work is having our radar on and follow the developments of trends, threats, lessons learned all over the world. And as I just mentioned, the increase, overwhelming increase of online activity for extreme right-wing terrorist purposes is quite a signal. And this is one of the signals. We're also following up on cyber threats, on bio threats and others, but also on what is the role of gender in the fight against terrorism, in the prevention of terrorism. And if we look at a female terrorist, is a female terrorist per se a dangerous terrorist or innocent and a victim? We cannot base our work on assumptions. And that means that we really need to have an evidence-based certainty about what we say. And that is the reason why my organization have reached out to what we call the Global Research Network. And that's a network, again a network, a partnership with more than 100 research centers, institutes, and universities. Again, that helps us to be like a sort of an early warning system, an information switchboard, and to tell the world right away before it starts to be a real problem, and before that trend is translated into tangible terrorist activity, that we have to pay attention to certain trends and threats. As I promised, I'm now landing at the level of COVID-19. And what is the impact of COVID-19? Look at us. We're all connected to COVID-19, and that's great. And even more connected because we are part of the solution. We can all write a history by staying home, by staying socially distant, by putting on our mask. We can make the difference. And to be very honest, I saw a lot of similarities between that fight against the virus, the COVID-19 virus, and the fight against terrorism. Both are global phenomenon. We can all do a little part, but at the end of the day, we need to tackle this problem at the global level. Hence, the added value of the United Nations in order to support all the member states in doing so, and to strive for international cooperation more than ever, and to exchange and share information on how the COVID-19 is changing its shape, its morph, and how it's moving on, and what is needed to stop it. For terrorism, it's exactly the same. I started saying that terrorism is a global phenomenon. You can tackle it at local level, at national level, at regional level, and at global level. But all of them are equally important. You cannot exclude one and think that you can be impactful. That doesn't work. So yes, there are lots of similarities, but the impact on the way we were working in my organization from one day to another, all the visits, the evaluation, assessment visits, physical visits stopped because we all were in the same boat to say we cannot travel. The travel restrictions are overwhelming, and safety and health of all my colleagues, my 50 colleagues, is absolute priority, and especially for the Secretary General and the United Nations. But we have not doubted one moment to continue the business, to continue to have this dialogue from our home offices with the member states, with the ambassadors of the different 193 member states here in New York, connecting with the resident coordinators and the country teams in the respective countries, and to really be sure that we know what are the ongoing threats, and that we don't miss anything. And finally, we have seen that even on the terrorist, COVID-19 had an impact. From the offline, they went to the online, increased their activity, used it to all consider the COVID-19 as a hoax, or consider the COVID-19 as part of a conspiracy from minorities against the rest of the population, and again, creating division, creating hatred, violence, and that would take in other forms. It's also true that some of the terrorist organizations thought about using the COVID-19 as a source of inspiration to spread diseases and to take over, in the case of Islamist terrorist groups, especially the Western world. We've also seen some cases where especially the health infrastructure, remember what I said about the soft targets? Well, there are no mass gatherings, and that is part of the solution against COVID-19. But that's a little bit annoying for terrorists because they don't know where to go to attack a soft targets. What we have seen, for instance, here in the United States, in Kansas City, Missouri, a foiled attack against a hospital where COVID-19 patients were being taken care of, and in Afghanistan recently an lawful terrorist attack against a maternity hospital. So they're a little bit moving their space. Of course, when they used to finance their activity to drug trafficking and weapons trafficking, and were used to move around the countries and across the borders, also that possibility has been reduced, and their supply chain has also been reduced. So yes, there was an impact, but that doesn't mean that they are not active. At the contrary. If we look at the measures taken by governments, some have taken emergency power measures. We have also seen that digital surveillance measures have been taken. And that is good when it's limited in time and it's really focused to trace and track the infected persons. If it is, however, heavy-handed and heavily securitized, it might have a contrary effect. And that's something we absolutely have to take care of. If you start to moderate the speeches online, you also have to take care of the freedom of expression. So everything we do has to be compliant with human rights. Otherwise, you have an opposite effect. And finally, and that's last but not least, the possible economic and financial impact of COVID-19. We see it gradually, we see it on a lot of things, but especially for the United Nations, how will the member states, who we are heavily depending on to ensure security measures and safety measures, make their priorities? Will it go more to health concerns, economic and regrowth of their society, than to security-related issues? How will states who are known as donor states will look at helping member states out with their security problems? And so yes, how will be the funding of the United Nations, because the United Nations are funded by the member states and have done over the last 75 years tremendous good work, as we all saw. So a lot of question marks, we don't know the answers yet, but let's move now to the last part. As promised, let's look at terrorism with a lens of SDGs. And I think that especially education pops up, the gender equality, also the peace, justice, and the strong institutions part, and finally also the partnership and international cooperation. And these are the SDGs 4, 5, 16, and 17. Without any doubt, 16 is the most relevant one if we talk about how to combat violent extremism and terrorism, how we strive for justice. But in my 2 years and 9 months of activity, I started to work at the United Nations in November 2017. I have been visiting a lot of heavily concerned countries concerned by terrorism, because I thought that going to those countries was absolutely vital and needed. And I have seen that in countries heavily concerned by terrorism, very often the large majority of the society is represented by youth. And what youth is being labeled is people, young people between 15 and 30 years old. And we see that in those heavily affected countries, especially in Africa. I have been in Mali, I've been in Nigeria, I've been in Kenya, in Nigeria, in the northeastern part of Nigeria, Maiduguri, where Boko Haram is taken hostage, kidnapping for ransom young girls and young boys massively, is closing the schools, is threatening the teachers, just to ensure, simply to ensure that youth do not have any education, do not have any perspective of a decent work, and have no perspective for a better developed and economic rich country. So it's part of the strategy. And I've seen exactly the same when I was in Chad. In Chad, at the Lake Chad Basin, I went to the island of Bol, where I met with women and children and men being taken hostage by Boko Haram, far away from the schools, because the schools are closed, the hospitals are far away on the mainland. Those people were returning back to their tribes, were having hope, and that's exactly what we have to give them. We have to give them education, we have to give them proper work, we have to give them proper health, because the Lake Chad Basin has also undergone another problem, the problem of climate change, the drying up of that lake. So the economy has been heavily impacted by an environment, climate, and about heavy security, terrorist activities by Boko Haram, and poverty. So yes, there is a link between all those different uncertainties, and we have to work on all these uncertainties and bring them solutions. I was recently digging into another country in South Africa, where only in the first months between January and April, they were faced with as much terrorist actions as over the last 4 years. And part of the terrorist impact was that more than 55,000 children were without school, because more than a serious number of schools had been closed, and a serious number of teachers were without work. So that is something that we have to take care of, because if we do not give them education, not ensure that they have proper work in time, they will become the next generation of easy potential targets of terrorists. So that's something I wanted to bring nearer to you as one example. I already alluded to the need for including gender and gender equality. I'm in fact, one of the females dealing with terrorism in the Security Council, the only female dealing with security in the Security Council, and my counterpart is a man dealing with terrorism at the level of the Office of Counterterrorism. There is a balanced approach, and I think that this is absolutely needed because we need both men and women to be part of the strategies, to be part of the design of those counterterrorism strategies. And if we look at women terrorists, we have to look at all their roles. Are they real terrorist attackers? Are they facilitators? Are they supporters? Or are they simply victims? So it's extremely important that we look at all the players in a very, very nuanced way, but that we talk with both and make both part of the solution. I think I will end there, wishing you all really a very good 3 days, insightful, inspirational days, and I'm very hopeful that you will, you can, and you must shape the world of tomorrow. You are the future. You have all the skills necessary, and you are an integral part of the solution, not only for all the well-known 17 SDGs, but also in relation to the prevention of terrorism and the countering of terrorism and violent extremism. You can be a vital part. Just think about what we all do in relation of COVID-19. Well, think about the same kind of fight against a virus called terrorism. Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Konix, for that very enriching session. I believe all our delegates, all our participants would have really had a good experience listening to you, coming from a very experienced background. And seeing as that we have a bit of time constraints, we will be taking up questions, but we'll be trying to take as many as we can in this short period of time. So participants, as I've already mentioned, my name is Jaideep Singh. I'm the Secretary General, and I'll be taking the questions and moderating them here to Ms. Konix. And let's start off with our first question, which I'm going to amalgamate a few questions together. We have a question from Enlil, who comes from the Netherlands. And we also have a question from John, who comes from Israel. And they both essentially are echoing the same idea that the UN handles reports which show several member nations on anti-terrorism panels. And sometimes it is seen that these countries seem to have some areas of financial support being given to these terrorist organizations. But then again, there is this problem that the word terrorism isn't clearly defined, because how do we draw the line between terms like terrorism and freedom fighting? So what do you think your views are on this, coming from a very experienced background yourself? And we'd really like to hear that.
Well, I've been in fact teaching terrorism at the summer school last year in Israel, and one of my first questions is how can you fight terrorism without having a universal definition? It would have been wonderful if we were all have been agreed among the 193 countries on a definition of terrorism. That would make our lives easier, more simple. But politically, we all have different stands and different experiences. Although we know that we can only fight terrorism, as I said, at all the levels: local, national, regional, and global level. And in spite of the lack of definition, there are some conventions, a convention of the financing of terrorism that gives you a definition of terrorism. We have also Security Council Resolution 2178, if we become technical, on foreign terrorist fighters, that gives us a definition of foreign terrorist fighters. What are foreign terrorist fighters? But it is, in fact, the Security Council which became a norm setter, and which all along 2001, after the 9/11 attacks, through Security Council resolutions, have really addressed what are the policy problems and how can we introduce those threats and trends in Security Council resolutions, and how can we make sure that those Security Council resolutions are properly implemented in the member states, in policy and in legislation. And that is what we are doing right now. And of course, if we go to the Netherlands and to Israel, we have different problems the country might be confronted with different kind of terrorist countries, but they all have to deal with border management, with whatever the setting is, with a whole of society, a whole of government, a counterterrorism strategy, a regional strategy. They will all have to deal with financing of terrorism, wherever the country and its situation is, and whomever they look at. And that is where we come in, and where we look with the lens of a very neutral, a very independent, and a very, I would say, open-minded but objective assessor, not to name and shame, but to ensure that the security chain is as strong as possible, and that all the CT measures are adapted to the specific situation of that country, and that we make all those countries learn from experiences and practices and good or bad lessons that those countries went through. And if you look at the different countries, whatever their look at their own security situation is, they might not be aware of what can be done to prevent, to be prepared against other forms of terrorism, because they never had the experience today, but they might be confronted with it tomorrow. And there is where the United Nations comes in, zooming in to every country, zooming into the country and the region, and look across the different regions. Do we need a definition? It would be marvelous, it would be a dream world, but the political situation, we all know the geopolitical situation is not leading conducive to such a debate. Kazakhstan, for instance, was one of the countries last year which took the initiative of having a code of conduct, and they're working on it for having a world free of terrorism, working on a definition. We're not there yet, but we can do our work relentlessly.
Thank you, Ms. Connick. Indeed, an answer which we all can really take away a lot of things from. I think with that we can bid you goodbye. I think you are to leave. You need to leave. But thank you very much for joining us today, and it has been absolutely marvelous having you here and enlightening all our delegates with that insightful experiences you've been sharing. We had a lot of questions coming in, but due to time constraints, I'm afraid we'll not be able to take them all today. But thank you so much for your insightful speech and your insightful presentation, and I'm sure our delegates will learn a lot from this. I'll hand it over now to my colleague at the panel, Ananya. Ananya, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jaydeep, for facilitating the Q&A. And Ms. Koenigs, I echo Jaydeep's comments when we say how grateful we are of the time you've given us today in sharing the thoughts as an expert that, on a topic that many of us are interested in. We would have loved to present you with a bouquet of flowers, but instead, I hope that our words of deep appreciation will suffice. Thank you again for your contributions to our summit. Thank you. I would now like to introduce Alejandro Borja, the founder and executive director of Youth Leads, and our partners in Quito leading MUN Impact Ecuador and MUN Ancasa. Mr. Borja will share a few thoughts about the summit's Spanish language sessions and the live Spanish interpretations that some of our workshops will enjoy. Mr. Borja, you now have the floor.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much. Uno de los objetivos principales de MUN Impact es hacer que la experiencia y los modelos de Naciones Unidas se conviertan en una oportunidad accesible para todos, independientemente de su origen o su idioma. Good morning, presenters, participants, changemakers. My name is Alejandro Borja, and on behalf of Youth Leads, the national partner for MUN Impact in Ecuador, I can only say that we are honored to be part of this unique summit. Es un honor para nosotros como Youth Leads, representantes oficiales de MUN Impact Ecuador y MUN Ancasa, darles la bienvenida a esta cumbre. We are completely convinced that this is going to be an exceptional experience where you, the youth, will have the opportunity to listen, learn, and feel motivated by dozens of speeches and workshops. As Youth Leads, MUN Impact Ecuador and MUN Ancasa, we are committed with the MUN Impact's mission to reach as many students from all over the world as possible. And that's the reason why we decided to lead the process towards the creation of the Global Summit Spanish branch. Esperamos que disfruten esta experiencia que aprendan muchísimo y se dejen inspirar. Enjoy, learn, and get inspired. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Borja. We would now like to play a very special video on behalf of our press team on how MUN Impact has been tackling the pandemic.
China has identified the cause of the mysterious pneumonia outbreak in Wuhan City.
Deadly virus dubbed it COVID-19
pandemic. Schools across much of the UK look set to close their doors and shut down by the end of the week.
States across the country that sent students home.
Teaching lessons online.
The reality of learning while staying safe.
With schools closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, youth everywhere are stuck at home, separated from classmates, cut off from teachers. Changes in our day-to-day life have emphasized the importance of staying connected and working together. Now, more than ever, youth are searching for ways to connect when everything has been disrupted.
Nearly overnight, we have entered a radically new age of learning. The scale of the challenge demands innovation, partnership, solidarity.
The pandemic has created a unique opportunity for students across the globe to build relationships with one another, to discuss global challenges, to collaborate, to create solutions to pressing global issues. Youth around the world are already seeking each other out to work together, guided by the Sustainable Development Goals.
17 Sustainable Development Goals. They are a to-do list for people and planet and the blueprint for success.
5 years after their creation, much remains to be done to achieve these goals by 2030.
Your generation has a fundamental role to play because, to be frank, my generation has largely failed.
Young people are rising to meet these challenges.
Because no one is too small to make a difference.
It is time to think about the future generation.
Showing the world how capable they are of effecting lasting change.
We've seen our generation standing up for the world we want to see, for the vision of the world that we have.
It's about what have you been doing to create the change that you want to see.
Young people have power. Our voices are powerful. Real change can come from young people standing up for what they believe in.
So what I'm telling you to do now is to act.
Help us help our youth move into the 21st century and provide the spaces and tools necessary for them to discuss, debate, and collaborate on solutions. Solutions for us all. These are our future leaders. Let's do what we can so they can lead us all to a brighter future.
Participants, we are here to make a difference in this world, and the pandemic does not stop us from doing that. We will begin this global summit to work towards initiating change and improving the future. Participants, on behalf of all summit executives and the MUN Impact Global Leadership Community, I hereby declare this inaugural MUN Impact Global Summit officially open. Participants, before you attend your first session, there are a few reminders.